Henry Whitmore had it all: wealth, status, and a future set by the elite. His wedding was supposed to be a perfect celebration, a spectacle of tradition and power. But when the father of the bride, a simple craftsman, delivered an unexpected gift, the entire room froze. What could be inside that modest package that made even the wealthiest of them question what they really owned? What the Whitmores didn't know was that the gift held a secret that could destroy the legacy they had spent generations building. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what happens after this revelation changes everything. And now tell me, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. If you're enjoying this story, leave a comment and make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely won't want to miss. Henry Whitmore stood by the grand dining table, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the opulent surroundings of his family's mansion. The air was thick with the scent of rich, roasted duck and fragrant herbs, a feast meticulously prepared for a momentous occasion. His heart raced, not from the anticipation of the meal, but from the weight of the announcement he was about to make. Across the table, his parents, Reginald and Eleanor Whitmore, sat with their usual air of aristocratic poise. Reginald, a man of robust stature, wore a tailored suit that spoke of old money and tradition. His steel-grey hair was slicked back, and his sharp eyes surveyed the room like a hawk searching for prey. Eleanor, elegant and composed, adorned herself with jewels that glimmered with the envy of lesser families. She was the embodiment of grace, but her smile held an edge that could cut through glass. As the last of the guests settled into their seats, Henry cleared his throat, his pulse quickening. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, yet the words felt heavy on his tongue. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. "I have some wonderful news to share." The clinking of silverware came to an abrupt halt, and the room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "I'm engaged to Camille Rousseau," he declared, a mixture of pride and apprehension swelling within him. A palpable tension filled the air. For a fleeting moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fireplace. Reginald's fork clattered against his plate, and his expression hardened. "Camille Rousseau?" he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Isn't she the daughter of that artisan?" Eleanor's smile faltered, her gaze flickering between Henry and her husband. "Darling, are you sure this is wise? A marriage is not only about love, it's about joining respectable families." Henry felt frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Mother, Camille is the woman I love. She's kind, intelligent, and—" "Intelligent?" Reginald interjected, his voice rising slightly. "What can a mere artisan offer to our family? A wedding is about legacy, Henry. We have a reputation to uphold." Henry's heart sank at his father's words, but he pressed on. "Camille is more than her background. She's proven herself to be a remarkable person, and I want to spend my life with her." Reginald's jaw clenched as he exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who now wore a mask of concern. "Henry, this is not just about you. Think of the family name," she urged. "What will our peers say?" "It's my life," Henry replied, determination hardening his voice. "I will not sacrifice my happiness for the sake of appearances." The tension in the room was palpable, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. As the meal continued, small talk resumed, but the atmosphere was noticeably strained. Henry could feel the discord growing like a chasm between him and his parents, but he refused to back down. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Camille sat across from Elias in their modest living room, the warm glow of the lamp illuminating her worried features. She fidgeted with the hem of her dress, the weight of the impending meeting with the Whitmores pressing heavily on her heart. "What if they don't accept me, father?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias, a man of few words, regarded her with soft, wise eyes. "Camille, you must remember that your worth is not defined by their opinions. You carry the strength of our family in your heart. You are not just an artisan's daughter, you are a Rousseau." She nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. "I fear they'll see you as just a poor craftsman, someone unworthy of their son." Elias leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "The world often judges based on wealth and status, But true value lies in integrity and skill. You know who you are, and I have taught you that respect comes from within. Still, I can't help but worry, she confessed, a tremor in her voice. What if they humiliate you? What if they look down on us? Elias reached across the table, his calloused hand gently squeezing hers. I have faced many men like Reginald Whitmore. They may wield power, but they do not define our worth. Stand tall, my daughter. You are stronger than you realize. His words provided a flicker of comfort, but Camille's heart remained heavy with uncertainty. She was proud of her father and his craft, but the thought of facing the Whitmores filled her with trepidation. The following day, the invitation to the grand dinner arrived, elegantly crafted and sealed with the Whitmore crest. Camille's heart sank as she read the formal words, understanding the underlying tone. This was not an invitation to be welcomed. It was a judgment, an assessment of her worthiness. Father, I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice trembling. Elias studied the invitation, then looked up with a calm resolve. We will go, Camille. This meeting will show them who we truly are. They may see us as outsiders, but we will not be silenced. Despite her hesitation, Camille nodded, determined, to stand by her father's side. They would face the Whitmores together, no matter the outcome. As the day of the dinner arrived, Camille dressed carefully in a simple yet elegant gown, a stark contrast to the luxurious attire of the Whitmores. She took a deep breath, glancing at Elias as he donned his well-worn suit, a testament to his humble lifestyle. Remember, the Whitmores may have wealth, but they do not have what we possess, Elias said, his voice steady and reassuring. No, father, Camille replied, though her heart raced with anxiety. As they approached the grand Whitmore mansion, Camille felt a wave of unease wash over her. The opulence of the estate was overwhelming, a fortress of privilege and power standing before her. When the butler opened the door, his expression was one of barely concealed disdain as he regarded Elias's simple attire. Good evening. You must be Miss Rousseau and Mr. Rousseau, he said, his tone cool. Camille exchanged a glance with her father, who nodded subtly, encouraging her to step forward. They entered the lavish foyer, where the grandeur of the Whitmore home was on full display. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and exquisite artwork adorned the walls, each piece a testament to the family's wealth and status. As they walked further into the house, the whispers began. Guests adorned in silk and satin turned, their heads, their eyes narrowing with judgment. Camille's stomach churned as she felt the weight of their scrutiny. Eleanor Whitmore approached them, her smile as polished as the silverware on the dining table. Welcome, Mr. Rousseau. We are so glad you could join us tonight, she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. Thank you for having us, Elias replied, his tone respectful but firm. Reginald appeared at Eleanor's side, his expression unyielding as he assessed the newcomers. We hope you'll find the evening enjoyable, he said, his voice flat and devoid of genuine interest. Camille's heart raced as she took in the scene, feeling small and out of place. The opulence surrounding her only amplified her insecurities. She could sense the undercurrent of disdain swirling around them, and each polite smile felt like a thin veneer over contempt. As they settled at the dining table, Camille tried to focus on the conversation, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Reginald's probing questions about Elias's craft felt more like an interrogation than polite discourse. So, Mr. Rousseau, what exactly do you do? He asked, his tone condescending. Elias met his gaze without flinching. I am a woodworker, sir. I create pieces that tell stories, each one a testament to the skill passed down through generations. Ah, how quaint, Reginald replied, a smirk playing on his lips. But surely your work cannot compare to true artistry. Elias remained composed, his eyes steady. Art is subjective, Mr. Whitmore. What one person sees as quaint, another may see as valuable. The tension escalated, and Camille felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to interject, to defend her father, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she clutched her own hands tightly in her lap, pushing back the rising tide of humiliation. As the meal progressed, the conversations continued to dance around the superficial. Eleanor attempted to steer the discussion towards the wedding plans, her voice dripping with an insincere charm. "We're so excited for the upcoming wedding, Camille. It's a grand occasion, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," Camille replied, forcing a smile. "But I hope it reflects our wishes, not just tradition." Eleanor's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Tradition is what binds us, my dear. It's important to honor those who came before us." The words hung in the air, a reminder of the expectations that weighed heavily upon Camille's shoulders. As the evening wore on, she felt trapped between her love for Henry and the harsh reality of the world he came from. Elias, perceptive as always, as the grandeur of the Whitmore mansion enveloped the evening. The air was thick with tension and whispers. The reception hall sparkled under the opulent chandeliers, reflecting a world of wealth that felt foreign to Camille Rousseau. She stood beside Henry, her heart racing, as the evening unfolded with an air of forced elegance. Guests mingled, their laughter mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses, but Camille felt like an outsider looking in, acutely aware of the condescension that lingered just below the surface. Elias Rousseau, her father, moved through the throng with a quiet dignity. That contrasted sharply with the ostentation surrounding him. Clad in a simple yet well-tailored suit, he carried himself with a calm that belied the scrutiny of the elite. As he approached the center of the room, the atmosphere shifted, a palpable ripple of disdain passing among the guests. Camille's heart sank. This was supposed to be a celebration, yet her father was already being evaluated like an exhibit in a museum of fine art. The evening progressed with the predictable cadence of small talk overseen by Eleanor Whitmore, whose bright smile felt rehearsed. "Tell us more about your work, Mr. Rousseau," she prompted, her tone a blend of curiosity and thinly veiled condescension. "I imagine it must be quite fulfilling to create such quaint pieces." Elias met her gaze with a steadiness that surprised Camille. "Every piece tells a story, Mrs. Whitmore. The wood speaks to me, revealing its past and future. It's more than just crafting, it's preserving history." "Oh yes," Reginald Whitmore interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "History is indeed important, especially when it can be monetized." He chuckled lightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Elias, as if trying to discern whether the old man had any worth beyond the stories he told. The tension escalated, and Camille could feel the heat rising to her cheeks. "Father," she said softly, attempting to diffuse the hostility, "we should focus on the celebration." Elias placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Camille. I've faced worse than a few barbs," he replied, his voice calm but tinged with a hint of sadness. "Remember, it's not about their acceptance, it's about the truth of who we are." As the evening wore on, the moment Camille had dreaded approached. The time for gifts arrived, marked by a flourish of excitement and expectation. Guests presented extravagant tokens, diamond-studded tiaras, a rare painting from a renowned artist, and luxurious home decor that symbolized their wealth and status. Each offering was met with oohs and ahs, a parade of indulgence that left Camille feeling increasingly out of place. Then came Elias, his demeanor unchanged despite the ridicule that had accompanied his entrance. He pulled a small weathered bundle from beneath his coat. Camille's heart raced. She knew what it was, but the audience did not. "I have a gift for you, Henry and Camille," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. The laughter in the room faltered as the guests leaned in, curiosity piqued. "What could this possibly be?" someone whispered, a smirk playing on their lips. Elias gently unwrapped the cloth, revealing the intricately carved wooden mask. The room fell silent. The chatter and laughter were replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Camille held her breath as she watched Henry's face change from confusion to intrigue. "This is a family heirloom," Elias began, his voice resonating in the now quiet hall. "Dad has been passed down through generations of Rousseaus. It represents our lineage, our struggles, and the art that connects us to our history." He paused, searching the faces in the room. "But it also tells another story, a story that intertwines with the Whitmores." Reginald's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean by that?" he demanded, a hint of irritation coloring his tone. Elias continued undeterred. Many years ago my ancestors were artisans, working on the very land that now belongs to your family. They created and toiled, producing works that were sold for mere pittance, while your forebears grew wealthy from their labor. This mask is a reminder of that forgotten history. The silence deepened, the weight of Elias's words sinking into the hearts of the guests. Camille felt a swell of pride for her father, even as the whispers began anew, this time tinged with disbelief and discomfort. "Is this some kind of joke?" Reginald scoffed, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "We all know that history is written by the victors." Elias met his gaze unwavering. "And yet the truth remains, doesn't it? The legacy we leave behind is not solely defined by wealth, but by the lives we touch and the stories we carry forward. This mask is not just a relic. It's a testament to endurance and artistry, a part of the Whitmore story that should not be forgotten." Henry stood frozen, the mask trembling slightly in his hands. He turned to Camille, his eyes filled with questions. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Camille nodded slowly, her heart racing. "I've heard stories, Henry, but I never realized—" Her voice trailed off as she looked back at her father, who stood tall, a beacon of dignity amidst the condescension. Reginald, his composure faltering, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "This is hardly the time to discuss ancient grievances. We are here to celebrate a union, not to air family laundry." But the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Henry took a deep breath, the mask feeling heavier in his hands than the golden jewels surrounding them. "No, father, we can't ignore this. This is important." The room held its breath, and even the whispers ceased as eyes turned to Henry. Elias's face softened, pride shining in his gaze. "My wish for you both is to understand the weight of your choices. A legacy is not just about what we inherit. It's about what we choose to uphold." Henry's voice rang out with newfound clarity. "Then let's honor that legacy. It's time to acknowledge what has been hidden for too long." He raised the mask higher, his heart pounding with conviction. "This is the most valuable gift of the night. It represents truth, our interconnected histories, and the responsibility we carry forward." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of shock and reluctant admiration. Camille felt a swell of hope. Perhaps this was the moment they could redefine their lives, unshackling themselves from the burdens of the past. As the guests began to process the revelation, an unexpected silence enveloped the room once more. The Whitmores, once so powerful and untouchable, now faced a reckoning that had been long overdue. In that moment, Camille intertwined her fingers with Henry's, feeling the warmth of his resolve. They stood together, ready to face whatever would come next, united not just in love but in the truth that had finally come to light. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore mansion glimmered with opulence, the chandeliers casting a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air, blending into a symphony of celebration that was meant to mark the union of Henry Whitmore and Camille Rousseau. Yet beneath the surface of this extravagant event, a current of tension pulsed, particularly as the clock ticked toward the moment Elias Rousseau would step into the spotlight. Camille stood at a distance, her heart racing as she adjusted the intricate lace of her wedding gown. The dress, a creation of fine silk and delicate embroidery, was a masterpiece, yet it felt like a prison. She glanced around, spotting the condescending gazes of the Whitmore elite, their eyes glimmering with judgment. She could feel their whispers, the way they dissected her presence, as if she were an exhibit in a museum rather than a bride celebrating the most important day of her life. "Camille, darling, you look divine." Helena Whitmore, her future mother-in-law, approached her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I must say this dress is exquisite. Such a shame we had to compromise on the guest list. I would have loved to invite more of our friends, but you know how it is. Some people just don't fit in." "Thank you, Eleanor," Camille replied, forcing a smile as she tried to suppress the unease clawing at her insides. "I'm excited for the ceremony." Eleanor nodded, her gaze drifting over Camille's shoulder. "Just make sure you keep your father occupied. I wouldn't want him to embarrass us in front of our guests. Camille's heart sank at the implication. She knew her father, Elias, would do his best to maintain his composure, but she feared the condescension he'd face from the Whitmores. He'll be fine, I promise. He just wants to see me happy, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the ballroom, Henry was speaking with some of his friends, but his eyes kept darting toward Camille. He could sense her discomfort and felt a pang of guilt gnawing at him. She's really nervous, isn't she? One of his friends said, noticing Henry's distracted demeanor. Yeah, he replied, running a hand through his hair. I think it's the pressure of the whole event. I just wish my parents would ease up on her. She deserves better than this scrutiny. Come on, man, it's your wedding day. Focus on the positive. You'll be married soon. His friend clapped him on the back, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that the day was tainted by the expectations of his family. The ceremony approached. Camille spotted Elias entering the ballroom. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit that contrasted sharply with the extravagant attire of the other guests. The whispers began immediately, a low hum of disapproval that washed over her like ice water. She felt a surge of protectiveness toward her father as she watched him navigate through the crowd, his head held high despite the judgmental glances. "Papa," Camille called out, breaking away from Eleanor's watchful eye. She rushed to Elias and enveloped him in a warm embrace. "I'm so glad you made it." Elias smiled softly, but there was a flicker of sadness in his eyes. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Camille." "You look radiant," he said, stepping back to take in her entire appearance. "But remember, this day is about you and Henry. Don't let anyone take away your joy." "I know, but it's hard," she admitted, glancing over her shoulder where Eleanor and Reginald stood. Their expressions carefully neutral, but their disdain palpable. "They're treating you like you don't belong here." "They don't define who you are, nor do they define me," Elias replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "We carry our own worth, remember that, my dear." As the ceremony began, Camille took her place at the altar, her heart pounding in rhythm with the music. Henry stood across from her, his eyes filled with love and determination. Each vow exchanged was a promise of loyalty and devotion, but Camille couldn't help but feel an undercurrent of tension in the air, an unspoken challenge that lay ahead. After the vows were spoken and the guests erupted in applause, Camille felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were married. Now she just had to survive the reception. As they made their way to the lavishly decorated dining area, Camille held Henry's hand tightly. "I can't believe we did it," she whispered, her face lighting up with a smile that momentarily dispelled her worries. "We did," he replied, squeezing her hand back. "And from now on, it's just us. We'll build our own world." But as they entered the reception, Camille's heart sank. The room was filled with lavish decorations, and the guests were already seated, their eyes flicking toward the newlyweds with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. Then came the moment when the gifts were to be presented. Camille's stomach twisted into knots as she watched the guests present extravagant items: diamond-encrusted cufflinks, expensive artwork, and luxurious vacations. Each gift was a display of wealth, a reminder of the elite world Henry was born into. When it was finally Elias's turn, Camille felt her breath hitch. She watched as he stepped forward, a simple wrapped parcel in his hands. The contrast was stark, and she felt the eyes of the room on them, a mix of scorn and amusement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elias began, his voice steady but soft, "I present to you my gift for the newlyweds." Henry's expression was one of curiosity, mixed with anxiety. The room fell silent as Elias carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a beautifully carved wooden mask. Gasps and suppressed laughter rippled through the crowd, the whispers igniting like wildfire. "What is that?" Reginald Whitmore muttered, his disdain barely concealed. Elias raised the mask, its intricate designs glistening under the chandelier lights. "This is not merely a mask. It is a piece of our family's history. It represents the artisans of our past, those who toiled to create beauty while their labor was exploited by families like the Whitmores." The atmosphere shifted dramatically, the laughter dying in an instant. Camille's heart raced as she watched the look of disbelief wash over Henry's face, followed by a dawning realization. Elias. No, Camille whispered, panic rising within her. She could see the tension in Henry's shoulders, the way his jaw clenched as he absorbed the weight of his father's legacy. This mask, Elias continued, his voice steady, was carved by my great-grandfather, who worked tirelessly in the shadows of your family's fortune. It is a reminder that every legacy is built on the back of someone else's sacrifice. Henry's face turned pale as he processed the revelation. The room was thick with tension, the once celebratory atmosphere now suffocated by an uncomfortable truth. Camille felt her heart pound in her chest, torn between the desire to protect her father and the fear of the repercussions this revelation could have on their future. "Elias, please," she urged softly, stepping closer to him. "You don't have to do this." But Elias shook his head, determination etched on his face. "This is your truth, Camille. You deserve to know the history that has shaped your life and your marriage. A true legacy is not one of wealth, but of integrity and honesty." The silence in the room was deafening as the guests exchanged glances, some looking at Henry with a mixture of pity and disdain. Reginald's brows furrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line as he struggled to maintain his composure. Henry finally broke the silence, his voice firm yet filled with uncertainty. "This is the most valuable gift I could have received today, Elias. Thank you." The unexpected words hung in the air, and Camille felt a rush of emotions swell within her. She watched as Henry took the mask from Elias's hands, holding it, with reverence as if it were a fragile treasure. Elias's eyes softened and he nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they now shared. In that moment, Camille realized that this was more than just a gift. It was a bridge between their worlds, a connection forged in truth and love. As the weight of the moment settled over them, Camille understood that their lives would never be the same. The mask was not just a symbol of the past, it was a challenge to redefine their future. A reminder that true heritage was not merely about wealth, but about honoring the stories that shaped them. The reception continued around them, the guests still reeling from the revelation. But for Camille and Henry, the world had shifted. They stood together, united by the truth, ready to face whatever came next. As the grand reception hall of the Whitmore mansion buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, a sense of anticipation lingered in the air. The opulent chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests, all of whom were eager to witness the union of Henry Whitmore and Camille Rousseau. But amid the splendor, one figure stood apart, a humble craftsman, Elias Rousseau, Camille's father. Clad in a simple yet well-tailored suit, he clutched a small, unassuming bundle wrapped in plain fabric, a stark contrast to the lavish gifts surrounding him. As the time approached for the couple to open their presents, Elias felt the weight of the room's scrutiny. Eyes darted toward him, whispers floated like ghosts of judgment, and the air thickened with a palpable condescension. He knew that many in this social stratum would deem him an interloper, an insignificant speck in their glittering world. But he held his head high, his heart steady, ready to unveil the truth hidden within his gift. Henry, standing beside Camille at the center of the room, felt a mixture of excitement and tension. He had sensed the strain in his fiancée's posture. Throughout the night, the way her fingers had trembled slightly during their dance, and how her laughter had faltered under the weight of their guests' scrutiny. He glanced toward her, and their eyes met briefly. In that moment, he saw a flicker of fear, but also a glimmer of defiance. Camille was determined to remain strong. "Are you ready?" he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. Camille nodded, her resolve bolstered by his presence. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the evening wore on, the time for gifts finally arrived. The room quieted, and the guests settled into their seats, their eyes glued to the couple. Henry's mother, Eleanor, her face a mask of carefully composed joy, gestured for the first present to be brought forth, a lavishly wrapped box, adorned with ribbons and topped with an extravagant bow. As the gifts piled up, Elias stood off to the side, waiting for the right moment to present his offering. Finally, it was his turn. He stepped forward, the simple fabric bundle cradled in his hands like a precious treasure. The room fell silent, the air thick with curiosity and skepticism. Henry's heart raced as he watched his father's expression darken, a flash of irritation crossing Reginald's face at the sight of something so ordinary amid the opulence. "What do you have there, Elias?" Reginald asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "A piece of driftwood?" Elias remained unfazed, a calmness radiating from him as he smiled softly. "It's more than it appears, Reginald," he replied, his voice steady. "This is a family heirloom, a mask that represents the struggles and resilience of my ancestors." At this, Camille's heart raced. She could feel the tension in the room shift, curiosity mixed with derision. She stepped closer to her father, the warmth of his presence anchoring her. "Please tell them about it," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias nodded, carefully unwrapping the fabric to reveal the intricately carved wooden mask. It gleamed softly under the chandelier, light the craftsmanship evident in the delicate details of the design. As he held it up for the guests to see, a hush fell over the crowd. The mask was unlike anything they had ever seen, a testament to artistry born from a humble life. "This mask," Elias began, his voice resonating with conviction, "was carved by my great-grandfather, who dedicated his life to his craft. It is not merely a decoration. It tells the story of our lineage, our struggles, and the legacy of those who came before us." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You see, the Whitmore fortune was built upon the labor of artisans like my family. Our stories are intertwined, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not." Gasps rippled through the audience, and the atmosphere shifted. Reginald's face tightened, the veneer of composure cracking as he struggled to maintain control. "This is hardly the time for history lessons, Elias," he snapped, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Yet Elias continued, undeterred by the hostility. "I bring this to you as a gift, not just for the sake of tradition, but as a reminder of the truths we often overlook. Wealth can blind us, but it can also bind us to the past. This mask is a symbol of resilience, of dignity, and of the true value of heritage." Henry's heart raced as he absorbed the weight of his father's words. The mask, once merely an object, now stood as a powerful testament to the unspoken truths that had shaped his family's legacy. He glanced at Camille, and he could see her eyes glistening with unshed tears, a mixture of pride and sorrow etched across her features. "Elias," Henry finally spoke, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "This is the most valuable gift of the evening, a reminder that our legacies are not defined solely by wealth, but by the stories we carry and the integrity we uphold." Murmurs of surprise and discomfort rippled through the crowd as Henry held the mask, its weight heavy in his hands. He could feel the collective gaze of the elite bearing down upon him, their expectations clashing violently with the truth laid bare before them. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a reckoning. Reginald's face flushed as he struggled to respond, the power dynamics within the room shifting dramatically. "You would dare to question our legacy, Henry?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Our family has worked hard to build what we have. You would throw it all away for sentiment?" Henry stood tall, his heart pounding in defiance. "Sentiment? No, Father, this isn't about sentiment. It's about understanding where we came from and acknowledging the sacrifices made by those who were here long before us. This mask represents a truth that cannot be ignored." The tension in the room escalated, guests exchanging glances filled with confusion and disbelief. Camille reached for Henry's hand, squeezing it tightly as she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them. "Henry," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "I'm standing for what's right," he replied softly, his gaze never leaving his father's. "For you, for us, and for the legacy that truly matters." Elias looked at his daughter and son-in-law, a mixture of pride and sadness in his eyes. He knew the struggle they faced, the implications that would follow this moment. But he also knew that bravery often came with a cost. "Henry, my boy," he said, his voice steady, "you are the true heir to a legacy of courage. Do not shy away from it." As the silence hung in the air, The assembled guests shifted awkwardly, the weight of the revelation settling heavily upon their shoulders. Reginald's expression hardened, but for the first time doubt flickered in his eyes. The mask, once just a gift, had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of the buried truths that refused to remain hidden. In that moment, surrounded by the opulence of a world that had long dismissed him, Elias stood tall beside his daughter and son-in-law. They faced the elite together, united by the strength of their shared history and the courage to confront the past. The mask became more than just wood and craftsmanship. It became a beacon of hope, challenging the foundations of privilege and power that had shaped their lives. As the night wore on, the echoes of Elias's words lingered in the air, a reminder that true heritage lay not in wealth, but in the stories that bind them all together, stories that demanded to be heard, acknowledged and honored. Henry stood at the threshold of the grand Whitmore mansion, the opulence of the place now feeling like a gilded cage. The laughter and chatter of the guests echoed behind him, but he felt a heavy weight in his chest, a stark contrast to the jubilant atmosphere. The revelation of Elias Rousseau's gift had shaken him to his core, and the beautiful intricacies of the wooden mask lingered in his mind like a haunting melody. "Henry," Camille's soft voice, broke through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her eyes searching his face for answers. "Are you okay?" He turned to her, taking in the way her brow furrowed with concern. I'm not sure." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "That mask, it means more than I ever realized. It represents everything my family has tried to erase." Camille nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "Elias's story is important. It's not just about us anymore, Henry. It's about the legacy we want to create." Henry swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What if my parents never accept this? What if they refuse to acknowledge the truth? I can't just ignore the past, Camille. I don't want to be part of a tradition built on exploitation." Camille stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Then we won't be. We have the power to change things, to pave a new path. It starts with us." He looked into her eyes, seeing the strength she carried within her. "But what about the family name, the expectations? They've spent generations building this empire, and I'm supposed to just walk away. Is that what you really want?" she asked, her voice steady. "To inherit a legacy of lies? Or do you want to create something true and meaningful?" Henry's heart raced. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an anvil. He had always been the dutiful son, the one who followed the script written for him by his parents. But now, with the mask symbolizing a truth he could no longer ignore, he felt a flicker of rebellion ignite within him. "I want to be true to myself," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm terrified of what that means for the Whitmore name." Camille smiled, a soft encouragement that warmed his heart. "You're not just a Whitmore, you're Henry, and you have the right to choose your own legacy." Taking a deep breath, Henry stepped away from the threshold, feeling the cool air wash over him. "Let's find Elias," he said, determination shining in his eyes. "I need to talk to him." As they moved through the luxurious ballroom, Henry felt the eyes of the guests upon them. Whispers danced around the room, their judgment palpable. "There go the Whitmores, ready to embrace another scandal," he imagined them saying. But he no longer cared. The mask, the legacy of the Rousseaus, had awakened something deep within him. They found Elias standing near a window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens. The moonlight cast a silver glow on his weathered face, illuminating the lines of experience and wisdom etched into his skin. He turned as they approached, his eyes brightening with recognition. "Henry, Camille," he said, his voice warm despite the chill of the evening. "How did you enjoy the reception?" Henry hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "Elias, about the mask. I can't express how much it means to both of us. Your story, it's changed everything for me." Elias's gaze softened, a hint of pride flickering in his eyes. "The truth has a way of doing that. It can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. You must honor it, my boy, even when it's difficult." "I want to honor it," Henry replied fervently. "But how? My family, They'll fight against it. They don't want to hear anything that disrupts their world. Elias stepped closer, his presence grounding. Then it is your choice to make. You can either continue the cycle of silence and shame, or you can be the one to break it. It's a heavy burden to carry, but the rewards of truth are far greater than the weight of a name. Camille squeezed Henry's hand, her support unwavering. We want to build our own legacy, one rooted in honesty and respect. We want to honor both our families, not just one. Elias nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. You have the spirit of both your heritages in you, and that is a powerful combination. Remember, a legacy is not merely what you inherit, it's what you choose to create. Henry felt a surge of emotion at Elias's words. But what if it cost me everything? What if I lose my family? Sometimes the cost of truth is high, Elias said, his voice steady with conviction. But the cost of silence can be far greater. You must decide what you value most, your family's approval or your own integrity. Henry looked at Camille, who met his gaze with unwavering resolve. I want to stand for something true, he said, his voice gaining strength. I want to be proud of the legacy we create together. Elias placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, a gesture of support. Then go forth and build that legacy. Embrace the truth and let it guide you. The journey may be fraught with challenges, but you will not walk it alone. As they stood together, a newfound sense of purpose enveloped them. Henry could feel the weight of the mask in his mind, the stories it carried, and the history that had been buried. He understood now that the true legacy lay not in the wealth or status of the Whitmores, but in the values and connections forged through honesty and respect. Thank you, Elias, Henry said, his voice filled with gratitude, for showing me the way. Elias nodded, his eyes glimmering with warmth. Your journey is just beginning, Henry. Embrace it fully. As they stepped away from the window, Henry felt a sense of liberation wash over him. He was ready to confront the Whitmore legacy, to challenge the status quo, and to carve out a new path with Camille by his side. Together they would honor both their families, weaving their histories into a beautiful tapestry of truth and love. Let's go, he said, a determined smile breaking across his face. It's time to change the narrative. Hand in hand, Henry and Camille walked back into the ballroom, ready to face whatever awaited them. The whispers may follow, the judgments may come, but they would stand together, united in their commitment to truth and the legacy they were about to forge. Henry stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, the echoes of laughter and clinking glasses, fading into a dull murmur as he held the intricately carved wooden mask in his hands. The air was thick with tension. He could feel the weight of the stares from the Whitmore guests, a mix of disbelief and contempt simmering beneath their polished exteriors. Camille's father, Elias Rousseau, had just revealed a truth that shattered the very foundation of the Whitmore legacy, and now all eyes were on Henry, waiting for his next move. He could see his father, Reginald Whitmore, standing at the far end of the room, his expression a mask of barely contained outrage. "What have you done, Henry?" Reginald's voice was low, a dangerous whisper that cut through the chatter. "You've embarrassed this family in front of our peers." "I didn't ask for your approval," Henry shot back, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and fear. "This isn't about you or your precious reputation, it's about the truth." Eleanor, his mother, glided over, her smile now a mere facade. "Darling, you must understand that this is simply not how things are done. You cannot let these revelations affect our standing. We are the Whitmores." Henry clenched the mask tighter, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingertips, the history it carried pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. "But that's exactly the point, isn't it? Our standing is built on the exploitation of people like Elias and his family. We can't just ignore that." Elias stood nearby, quiet yet resolute, his eyes fixed on Henry with a mixture of hope and concern. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "Henry, you must do what is right, not what is easy. This mask isn't just a gift. It's a reminder of where we come from and the sacrifices made along the way." The room fell silent, the guests now hanging on every word. Henry could feel the weight of their judgment, but he also felt something else, a flicker of determination igniting within him. He took a breath, drawing strength from Elias's presence. "This is not just a family heirloom," he said, raising the mask for all to see. The light glinted off the intricate carvings, reflecting the legacy of craftsmanship that had been overshadowed for too long. "This is a symbol of the truth that our family has tried to bury." "Henry, you're making a grave mistake," Reginald barked, his voice rising in pitch. "This man is nothing but a common artisan. You cannot let his words sway you. We have a reputation to uphold." Henry turned to his father, anger boiling within him. "A reputation built on lies, on the backs of those who deserve so much more than we've given them. I won't be a part of that anymore." The murmurs in the room grew louder, a mix of shock and intrigue. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to support Henry or recoil in horror at the disruption of their social order. Camille, standing beside her father, felt her heart swell with pride for Henry, yet a pang of fear gripped her. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing din. Elias nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. "You have the power to change this narrative, Henry. You can choose to honor the legacy of your family through truth, not deception." With newfound resolve, Henry turned back to the crowd. "I refuse to accept the notion that wealth and status define who we are. We must acknowledge our past, learn from it, and move forward with integrity. This mask is a testament to the resilience of those who came before us, and it belongs to both of our families." The room was charged with a palpable energy, a mix of discomfort and excitement. Reginald's face had paled, and he looked as if he might explode with indignation. "You will regret this," he warned, his voice low and menacing. "Regret? I think I'll find regret in not standing up for what is right," Henry replied, feeling the adrenaline course through his veins. "For too long, we've turned a blind eye to the truth. No more." Just then, Camille stepped forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil surrounding them. "My father taught me that true value lies in our actions and our relationships, not in wealth or status. This mask represents the strength of our heritage, and it is something we should all honor, not hide from." Henry looked at her, admiration swelling in his chest. Together they stood as a united front against the oppressive weight of tradition. "We can create a legacy that respects everyone's story," he added, glancing at Elias. "Not just our own." The tension in the room was palpable, and Henry could feel the shift. Whispers raced through the crowd as some guests began to reconsider their opinions. A few nodded approvingly, while others wore their disdain openly on their faces. "What is happening?" a voice called from the back, breaking the silence. "Are we really going to allow this artisan to dictate our legacy?" Another voice piped up. "What if he's right? What if we've been ignoring the very foundation of our wealth?" Henry seized the moment, feeling the tide of the conversation begin to turn. The truth is, every one of us has a story worth telling, a legacy worth honoring. Elias deserves our respect, and so do all the artisans and workers who contributed to our family's wealth. Reginald stepped forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. "This is absurd. You're risking everything for a fleeting moment of idealism. You'll see, Henry, that the world doesn't work this way." "Maybe it's time for the world to change, Father," Henry shot back, his voice rising. "Maybe it's time to break free from the chains of tradition that have kept us blind for too long." The murmurs grew louder, and Henry could feel the shift in the room. A few guests were nodding in agreement, while others looked on, unsure how to react. Camille squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes shining with determination. "Let's not forget," Elias interjected, his voice calm yet firm, "that every legacy can be rewritten. It's never too late to choose a different path, one that acknowledges the past while striving for a better future." Henry turned to Elias, grateful for his support. "You're right. We can't erase history, but we can choose how we honor it moving forward. This mask," he held it up again, "is a reminder of our shared humanity, our shared struggles. It's time to build a new legacy, one of respect, dignity, and integrity." As the crowd began to murmur in agreement, Henry felt a sense of hope welling up inside him. For the first time, he saw a flicker of understanding in the eyes of some of his guests. Perhaps they were beginning to see that the true value of their legacy lay not in their wealth, but in the stories they had overlooked for far too long. Reginald's face twisted in anger. "You are a fool, Henry. You're throwing away everything. We've built for nothing. You'll regret this decision." "No, father," Henry replied, his voice steady and resolute. "I will not regret choosing truth over pretense. I will not allow fear to dictate my choices any longer." With that, a ripple of applause broke out from a small group at the edge of the ballroom, startling everyone. It grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire, igniting a spark of rebellion against the old order. Henry felt a surge of energy, as if something monumental was shifting within the very walls of the Whitmore estate. Looking at Camille, he saw the pride shining in her eyes, and he knew they were on the precipice of something extraordinary. The legacy of the Whitmores was about to change, and it was a change they would embrace together. Henry stood at the center of the grand hall, the weight of the carved wooden mask heavy in his hands. The once vibrant chatter of the reception had faded into a palpable tension, a suffocating silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Guests exchanged furtive glances, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. The opulence of the Whitmore estate, with its glittering chandeliers and lavish decor, felt suddenly trivial in light of the truth that had just unraveled. "Henry," came the strained voice of his father, Reginald, cutting through the stillness. "What you hold is a mere trinket, a relic of a bygone era. We are not bound by the past, we are the future." His tone dripped with disdain, as if attempting to dismiss the significance of the mask with a wave of his hand. "Is that so?" Henry replied, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of defiance. "This trinket is a testament to our history, to the blood and sweat of those who came before us. Do you really believe we can just ignore their struggles?" Eleanor, standing beside her husband, interjected with a sharpness that belied her usual poise. "Henry, this is not the time to question our lineage. You have a responsibility to uphold the Whitmore name, to preserve our legacy." Her eyes flickered toward the guests who watched with rapt attention, some with barely concealed amusement, others with concern. "Preserve our legacy?" Henry echoed, incredulous. "You mean perpetuate a lie? Build our lives on the backs of those we've oppressed?" He felt Camille's hand squeeze his, her support a balm to his turbulent thoughts. The warmth of her grip reminded him of the love that had brought them to this moment, a love that was now overshadowed by the expectations of his family. Elias stood to the side, a silent observer of the unfolding drama. His heart swelled with pride as he watched his daughter and her husband confront the very foundations of the Whitmore legacy. The mask, a symbol of their shared history, had sparked a fire in Henry that Elias had long hoped would ignite. He took a step forward, his voice calm yet resolute. "What I gave you is not just a mask, Henry. It is the story of your family's rise. It is a reminder that every fortune has its price." Reginald scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "And what would you know of fortunes, Elias? You spent your life carving wood, not building empires. Your opinion is irrelevant here." The old man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of defiance igniting within him. "Irrelevant? Perhaps. But I have seen the cost of your empire, Reginald. I have watched as my ancestors were sacrificed on the altar of your wealth. The masks, the crafts, the lives of those who worked for you, they are not just collateral damage. They are the foundation of your riches." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Henry felt the tension shift. Some guests exchanged uneasy looks, their privilege suddenly feeling like a noose tightening around their necks. Reginald's face flushed with anger, but Henry pressed on, emboldened by the support of Camille and Elias. "This is not just about us," Henry said, his voice rising above the murmurs. "This is about all the lives affected by our decisions. We cannot celebrate our union while ignoring the truth of where we came from. I will not be a part of a legacy built on exploitation." Eleanor's face twisted in disbelief. "Henry, think about what you're saying. You'll ruin everything we've built. The society, the connections, the power." He turned to her, his expression softening as he realized the fear behind her words. "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Mother. I'm trying to build something real, something that honors the past rather than hides it. At that moment, Camille stepped forward, her voice firm and unwavering. "You've all spoken about legacy as if it's something to be preserved at all costs. But what about love? What about truth? If we truly want to build a future together, we must confront the past, not sweep it under the rug." The hall fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Henry looked at Camille, admiration flooding his heart. She was brave, fearless in the face of their family's judgment. A part of him felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could break free from the chains of expectation. Reginald's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. The whispers of the guests grew louder, some expressing their disbelief, while outros murmured in agreement. The elite, who had always wielded their power with an iron fist, were now facing the consequences of their actions. "Do you think this will change anything?" Reginald finally said, his voice low and menacing. "The world will not remember this moment. They will forget you and your ideals. They will remember the Whitmore name." "Perhaps," Henry replied, his resolve unshaken. "But I refuse to let the past dictate my future. I will not forget where I came from, nor will I allow my children to inherit a legacy built on the suffering of others." Elias placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, pride radiating from him. "You have chosen well, Henry. Your strength lies not just in your name, but in your heart. This is the moment to embrace the truth." The whispers in the room began to soften, replaced by a sense of uncertainty. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their laughter replaced by a contemplative silence. The truth laid bare before them was a stark contrast to the polished facade they had built their lives upon. Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the mask shift in his hands. He turned to the guests, his voice steady. "If we are to move forward together, we must acknowledge our past. We must find a way to honor those who came before us, to celebrate their sacrifices. This marriage is not just a union of two families. It is an opportunity to create a new legacy, one built on love, respect, and equality." Camille's eyes sparkled with tears, a mix of pride and hope swelling within her. The room held its breath, the tension palpable as they awaited the reactions of the Whitmore elite. Would they accept this new vision, or would they cling to the old ways? Reginald's expression was unreadable, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice low and measured. "You may believe you can change everything, Henry, but our world is unforgiving. Tradition is not easily broken. Tradition should serve us, not bind us," Henry countered, feeling the strength of his convictions solidifying. "And I refuse to be bound by a legacy that I cannot respect." As the guests began to murmur amongst themselves, Henry turned back to Elias and Camille, finding comfort in their unwavering support. Together they had the strength to forge a new path, to honor the past while building a future that reflected their values. Elias smiled at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride. "You've chosen your own path, Henry. It is a brave one, and it will not be without challenges, but it is the right one." Henry nodded, the mask still firmly in his grip, a symbol of the journey ahead. No longer would he hide behind the veil of privilege. He was ready to confront the legacy of the Whitmores and to reshape it into something that honored the truth, love, and the sacrifices of those who had come before him. The path might be fraught with difficulty, but he was no longer afraid. Together with Camille, they would carve their own destiny, one that embraced the complexities of their intertwined histories. As sun rays filtered through the grand windows of the Whitmore mansion, casting intricate patterns on the polished wooden floors, the atmosphere was thick, with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as the guests mingled, their laughter ringing hollow in the opulent ballroom. Henry stood at the edge of the gathering, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched Camille across the room. She wore a radiant smile, yet he could see the flicker of unease in her eyes as she exchanged pleasantries with the other guests. "Are you ready for this?" Henry asked, stepping closer to her, his voice low but firm. Camille turned to him, and for a moment the world around them faded. "I don't know, Henry. I feel like a fish out of water. This isn't me." Her gaze flickered toward the gathering crowd, a sea of silk and jewels that seemed to shimmer with disdain. "Just remember, you belong here just as much as they." "Do," he reassured her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "You're the one I chose, and that's what matters." Before she could respond, Eleanor Whitmore glided over, her presence commanding attention. "Henry, darling, you must greet our guests. They're dying to meet the new Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her tone dripping with forced sweetness. "Yes, Mother," Henry replied, though his eyes remained locked on Camille. "I'll be right back." As he moved to join his parents, Camille felt the weight of the world settle upon her shoulders. She took a deep breath and forced a smile as she was approached by Lady Perkins, a renowned gossip in their circle. "Ah, Camille, how delightful to see you. The Whitmores must be thrilled to have you as part of their family," Lady Perkins cooed, her voice dripping with insincerity. "But tell me, dear, how does it feel to marry into such wealth?" Camille's heart raced, but she forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. "I believe that love is more valuable than any amount of money," she replied, her voice steady. "Such a charming sentiment," Lady Perkins chuckled, her eyes narrowing. "But we all know that wealth brings power, and power, my dear, is what truly matters in our society. Don't forget that." As the conversation turned to the latest gossip, Camille felt a rush of frustration. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Elias, who stood quietly at the back, observing the festivities with a thoughtful expression. He had been so supportive, yet here, among the Whitmores, he was treated like an outsider. "Camille!" Henry's voice broke through her thoughts as he returned, a sense of urgency in his tone. "Have you seen my father? I think he wants to introduce me to some business associates." "Not yet, but I can help you find him," she offered, eager to escape the clutches of Lady Perkins and her incessant prattling. "Let's try the terrace. It's quieter there," he suggested, and together they made their way through the throng of well-dressed guests. The terrace was bathed in the glow of the setting sun, offering a momentary escape from the opulence within. Henry leaned against the railing, his expression contemplative. "I hate this, Camille. It's like a performance. I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 directions," he confessed, running a hand through his hair. Camille stepped closer, her heart aching for him. "You don't have to conform to their expectations. You can create your own path, Henry. I want that, but it's not easy. My father, he has such strong opinions about how things should be," he replied, his voice heavy with conflict. "Then, let's show them who we are. Let's honor the legacy of your family while also embracing who we truly want to be," she urged, her eyes shining with determination. As they spoke, a figure appeared at the entrance of the terrace. It was Elias, his presence instantly commanding attention. Dressed simply yet elegantly, he stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. "Elias!" Henry exclaimed, relief flooding his features. "I'm glad you're here. I was just looking for you." Elias nodded, his gaze moving between the two young lovers. "I wanted to speak with you both. There's something important I need to share before the evening progresses." "Of course, what is it?" Camille asked, sensing the weight of his words. Elias took a deep breath, his hands clasping tightly in front of him. "I've been working on something special for you both. A gift that I believe holds great significance." "A gift?" Henry raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Yes, a family heirloom," Elias continued, his voice steady. "A mask that has been passed down through generations. It symbolizes the strength and resilience of our lineage, which intertwines with your family's history in ways you may not yet fully understand." Camille's heart raced. "You mean the mask you mentioned before?" Elias nodded. "It is more than just a piece of art. It carries the weight of our ancestors' struggles and triumphs. It is a reminder of who we are and what we stand for." Henry glanced at Camille, both intrigued and apprehensive. "When will you give it to us?" "During the reception. I believe it is the right moment." "It's time for the truth to be unveiled," Elias said firmly. "What do you mean by the truth?" Camille asked, her brow furrowing in concern. Elias looked out over the terrace, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden hue over the city skyline. "The truth is not just about the mask. It's about the legacy that has been hidden for too long. Your family's fortune was built on the backs of people like us, Camille. It's time to acknowledge that history. Henry clenched his jaw, a mix of anger and confusion washing over him. Are you saying my family exploited your ancestors? Elias met his gaze, unwavering. Yes, and the mask is a reminder of that connection, a connection that should not be forgotten. Camille could feel the tension crackling in the air between them. What do you want us to do with this information? She asked softly, her heart pounding. Elias turned to them, his eyes filled with a blend of hope and seriousness. I want you both to recognize the importance of this legacy and to choose how you will honor it. You have the power to break the cycle. You can choose to stand up for what is right. Henry took a deep breath, the weight of his family's history settling heavily on his shoulders. I don't want to be a part of the exploitation, Elias. I want to change things. Camille placed her hand over his, grounding him. Then we will, together. As they stood on the terrace, the golden light of the sunset enveloping them, a sense of purpose began to blossom within Henry. The path ahead was unclear, but with Camille and Elias by his side, he felt a newfound strength to confront the truth of his family's legacy and carve out a future defined by love and integrity, rather than the chains of tradition. Let's do this, he finally said, his resolve firm. Let's honor your legacy, Elias, and ensure that history is not forgotten. Elias smiled, a glimmer of pride shining in his eyes. Then, let us prepare for the unveiling. It's time for the Whitmores to face their past. And as they turned, back toward the opulent reception, a sense of unity lingered between them, a promise of the change that was about to unfold. As the grand reception hall of the Whitmore mansion glittered with opulence, the air was thick with the tension that had sparked the night before. The chandeliers cast a golden glow over the elegantly dressed guests, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Yet, at the center of this extravagance lay an undercurrent of discontent, a ripple of unease that stemmed from the revelation of the wooden mask, the heirloom gift from Elias Rousseau. Henry stood to the side, his heart racing as he clutched the intricately carved mask in his hands. It felt heavier than he had anticipated, not just in physical weight, but in the burden of its implications. He could feel the eyes of his parents on him, particularly the sharp gaze of his father, Reginald, who had always embodied the very essence of the Whitmore legacy, wealth, power, and an unwavering adherence to tradition. Henry, are you all right? Camille's soft voice broke through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her brow furrowed in concern. Dressed in a gown that had been chosen for her by Eleanor, she looked stunning yet uncomfortable, as if the fabric constricted her spirit as much as it did her body. He turned to her, his heart swelling with love and admiration for this woman who had dared to challenge the status quo. I'm fine, just thinking. About what? Camille pressed gently, her eyes searching his. About everything, he replied, glancing momentarily at his parents, who were engaged in hushed conversation with some of their snobbish friends. About the family legacy and what it truly means. Camille's expression softened, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. You don't have to carry that burden alone, you know. We'll figure it out together. Henry nodded, but his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The mask in his hands was not merely an object. It was a key to a past that had been buried beneath layers of privilege and denial. The words of his father echoed in his ears. Wealth and status were paramount, and anything that threatened that delicate balance was to be silenced or erased. But now, standing next to Camille, he felt a growing desire to confront that very legacy. As the guests continued to mingle, Reginald's voice rose above the chatter, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. Henry, come here for a moment, he called, his tone commanding. With a deep breath, Henry exchanged a glance with Camille before walking towards his parents. He could feel the weight of the mask pressing against his chest as he approached the table where Reginald and Eleanor sat, flanked by their high society. Companions, father, mother, he greeted, forcing a smile. Henry, we need to discuss the gift from the Rousseau, Reginald said, his voice low but firm. You can't possibly take this seriously. A wooden mask? What kind of impression does that leave? Henry clenched his jaw, the urge to defend his future father-in-law rising within him. It's not just a mask, father. It has a history, A story that connects our families in ways we never acknowledged, Eleanor interjected, her voice dripping with condescension. But dear, the history you speak of is hardly relevant. We are the Whitmores. Our legacy is built on achievements and influence. We cannot let the past dictate our future. Why not? Henry shot back, his voice rising with passion. Maybe the past is exactly what we need to confront. This mask symbolizes something significant, a truth we can no longer ignore. Reginald's eyes narrowed, irritation flashing across his face. Henry, you're not listening. You're jeopardizing everything we've built. Our name, our reputation. I don't care about the name if it's built on lies, Henry interrupted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. The room fell silent, all eyes turning towards him in shock. He could feel Camille's presence beside him, her silent support fueling his resolve. Henry, this is not the time or place, Reginald hissed, his voice low and dangerous. You are risking disgrace. Disgrace? Henry echoed, incredulity coloring his tone. What's disgraceful is pretending we're above our past. The Whitmores owe part of their wealth to the exploitation of people like Elias. It's time we acknowledge that and honor it. A murmur rippled through the guests, a mix of surprise and disdain. Henry's heart raced as he glanced around. The room, seeing the shocked faces, the aristocrats who had always viewed him as their golden boy, suddenly looked wary, as if he were a stranger who had just crashed their exclusive party. Eleanor's face flushed with indignation. You are embarrassing yourself, Henry. And Camille, she turned to the young woman, you should be ashamed of your father's antics. This is not how one conducts themselves in polite society. Camille stepped forward, her voice steady and unwavering. With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore, it's not about the society you wish to uphold. It's about the truth and the values we choose to embrace. My father taught me that dignity and respect are worth more than any title or fortune. Reginald sneered, his patience wearing thin. You think you can lecture us on values? Your father is a mere craftsman, and you— Henry cut him off again, his voice rising with emotion. And what does that make us then? Just because we wear fine clothes and live in a mansion doesn't mean we are better people. Wealth does not equate to worth. The tension in the room thickened, the air crackling with unspoken words and hidden resentments. Henry felt the eyes of the guests on him, some filled with curiosity, outros comme réprobation. In that moment he realized that he was no longer just a member of the Whitmore family. He was a man standing up for what he believed in, even if it meant breaking away from the expectations that had been placed upon him. Enough! Reginald barked, his voice shaking with fury. This is a wedding, not a platform for your misguided ideals. You will not ruin this day for us. Henry took a deep breath, his heart pounding, but he couldn't back down. I won't let you silence me. This is my life, and I choose to stand with Camille and her father. I will not turn my back on the truth. As he spoke those words, he felt a wave of clarity wash over him. He glanced at Camille, who was watching him with pride in her eyes, and then at Elias, who stood quietly observing the scene, a knowing smile on his face. In that moment, Henry understood that he was not alone in his fight for authenticity and integrity. Henry, Camille said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, whatever happens, I'm with you. He nodded, feeling a sense of unity between them that transcended the boundaries of wealth and class. And I'm with you, Camille, and your father. We will forge our own path. Reginald's face turned a shade of red as he struggled to regain control. You will regret this, Henry. You have shamed our family in front of our guests. You have chosen to ally yourself with those beneath us. Maybe it's time to redefine what beneath us means, Henry replied, his voice steady and resolute. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that true value lies in our choices and our actions, not in our bank accounts. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Henry felt a shift within himself. He was no longer just the obedient son. He was a man ready to challenge the status quo, to embrace a legacy built on truth rather than deception. The mask in his hands was more than just a relic. It was a symbol of the new legacy he intended to create, one rooted in love, respect, and an unwavering commitment to honor the past. With that thought, he turned to Camille, his heart racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. Together they would navigate the storm that was brewing, and together they would redefine what it meant to be a Whitmore. As the grand wedding reception continued around them, Henry stood at the edge of the ballroom, his heart racing. The opulent chandeliers cast a golden glow over the gatherings of the elite, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing in the vast room. But all he could focus on was the intricately carved wooden mask that Elias had just presented. The unexpected revelation about its history weighed heavily on his mind, twisting his insides with a mix of pride and guilt. "Henry," Camille's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "What just happened? Did you see their faces? They were in shock." "I did," he replied, still holding the mask, now resting lightly in his hands. "I never expected him to reveal. That I thought it would be just a simple gift." "Simple?" Camille shook her head, her expression a blend of disbelief and admiration. "That mask is a piece of our history, one that they've tried to erase. It's a bridge between our worlds." As the murmurs of the guests filled the air, Henry caught sight of his father, Reginald, standing at the other end of the room, his face a mask of displeasure. The older man's brow was furrowed, and he clasped his hands tightly behind his back, as if trying to physically contain his outrage. "They'll never let it go," Henry murmured, his gaze lingering on Reginald. "It's not just a gift to them, it's a challenge, a reminder that their fortune was built on the backs of men like Elias." Camille took a deep breath, her fingers curling around Henry's arm. "You need to confront him. You need to stand up for what's right." "Confront him? At my wedding?" Henry felt a pang of apprehension. This was supposed to be a celebration, Camille, not a battlefield. "But it is a battlefield," Camille exclaimed, her voice rising slightly. "This is about more than just us. It's about our families, our future. If you don't speak out now, when will you?" Henry looked down at the mask, its intricate carvings almost seeming to pulse with meaning. He could feel the weight of generations pressing down on him. "Oh, you're right," he finally admitted, a resolve building within him. "I can't ignore this, not anymore." As he turned to face the throng of guests, Camille squeezed his hand, offering silent support. The laughter that had filled the air now felt suffocating, a cacophony of superficiality that grated against his newly awakened conscience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henry's voice rang out, cutting through the noise as he stepped onto a small platform that had been hastily assembled for speeches. The room quieted, curious eyes turning toward him. "If I could have your attention, please." The guests exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and intrigue. Reginald's eyes narrowed, and Henry could feel the tension radiating from the older man, but he pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want to take a moment to address a gift we received tonight," he began, holding the mask aloft for all to see. "This mask, crafted by the hands of Elias Rousseau, is more than just a beautiful piece of art. It embodies a history that our family, my family, has tried to ignore for far too long." The murmurs swelled again, this time tinged with disbelief and discomfort. Henry locked eyes with Camille, her encouraging smile bolstering his courage. "Many of you know my family's name," he continued, his voice steadying. "The Whitmores have enjoyed a position of privilege and power in this community. But what you may not know is that our fortune was built on the backs of artisans like Elias and his ancestors, men who worked tirelessly, often for little more than scraps. This mask is a reminder of that history, a history that has been swept under the rug." Reginald's expression darkened as he stepped forward, a hand raised to cut Henry off. "Henry, this is not the time or place." "No, father." Henry interrupted, a surge of defiance flooding through him. "This is exactly the time and place. We can't keep pretending that our wealth is without consequence. I refuse to stand here in the shadows of our family's past, silencing the voices of those who built our legacy." A ripple of surprise and murmurs passed through the crowd. Henry could see some guests squirming in discomfort, while others seemed to lean in, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Elias, who had been standing quietly by Camille, now stepped forward, his expression calm yet resolute. "Henry, you don't have to do this. I appreciate your courage, but this is family business," he said softly. "No, it's not just family business anymore, Elias." Henry replied, turning to him with earnest eyes. "It's about justice. It's about acknowledging the truth and honoring it, regardless of the discomfort it brings to those in power. If we ignore this, we are condemning future generations to repeat the same mistakes." Camille's eyes glistened as she watched Henry's transformation. She could see the determination etched on his features, the resolve to break free from the chains of expectation that had bound him for so long. "Henry," Reginald's voice was dangerously low, "you're jeopardizing everything we've built. You'll tarnish the Whitmore name." Henry shook his head, his heart racing. "No, Father, I'm not tarnishing anything. I'm reclaiming it. I'm reclaiming our history. I won't allow our legacy to be defined by greed and exploitation any longer." The silence that followed was deafening. The elegance of the ballroom felt heavy with the weight of Henry's words. He could see some of the guests shifting awkwardly, their gazes darting away, uncomfortable with the truth being laid bare before them. "Henry, please." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, a mixture of desperation and fear. "This isn't how we raised you. Think of your future, of your position." "My future is not built on lies, Mother," Henry replied, his voice resolute. "If I'm to inherit anything, I want it to be a legacy of honesty, respect, and dignity. I want to honor those who came before us, not erase them." He turned back to the audience, his voice rising with passion. "Let this mask be a symbol of change. Let it remind us that true wealth is not measured in gold or property, but in the lives we touch and the respect we give to one another. Together, we can create a future that celebrates our shared humanity instead of dividing us by status." The room was still, and for a moment it seemed as if time had stopped. Then a slow clap began at the back of the room, growing louder as others joined in, the applause echoing against the high ceilings. Henry's heart soared as he realized that not everyone was against him. Some were inspired by his courage. Elias stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. "You speak the truth, Henry, and that truth will resonate far beyond these walls." As the applause continued, Camille felt a rush of emotions collide within her. She stepped forward, standing beside Henry, her hand intertwined with his. "Together we will honor our past and build a future that is rooted in justice and compassion. We will not forget who we are or where we came from." Henry looked down at her, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. In that moment, he knew that no matter the challenges ahead, they would face them together. The mask, now resting in his other hand, felt like a beacon of hope, guiding them toward a brighter tomorrow. As the applause echoed in the grand ballroom, Henry smiled, knowing that they had ignited a spark that could lead to change, not just for their families, but for the entire community. The legacy of the Whitmores would no longer be one of silence and shame, but one of truth and reconciliation,